Think about how exciting those first few weeks of a new relationship feel. It's like stepping into a movie where everything is brighter, smoother, and more magical. You're texting constantly, laughing at every little thing, and every touch feels electric. In those moments, it's so easy to believe you've found something rare and unshakable. But what most people don't realize is that this stage is less about the other person being the one, and more about the natural cocktail of chemicals in your brain. Attraction is intoxicating, and in those early days, you're not really seeing the full person in front of you. You're seeing the version they want you to see, and the version you want to believe exists. We all put on a little show at the beginning, don't we? Not in a manipulative way, but in that natural instinct we have to impress. We choose our best outfits, hide our quirks, hold back the parts of ourselves that feel too messy. We're essentially presenting a highlight reel, and the other person is doing the exact same thing. The problem is, when two highlight reels fall for each other, it feels incredible, but it isn't the whole picture. That's why, so often, the shine starts to fade around the 3-month mark. You begin to notice the gaps, the unfiltered side of them, the habits that weren't there before, because no one can perform forever. This is why the first 3 months can be so misleading. It feels like you're falling in love, but often you're falling in love with the idea of someone. You're falling in love with the story you've created in your head, one where this person is exactly who you've been waiting for. That's why people sometimes feel blindsided when suddenly the energy shifts. They say, but it was so amazing at the beginning. What happened? What happened is you were never seeing the full truth in the first place. You were seeing a version filtered through excitement, novelty, and projection. The danger is when you mistake that early intensity for certainty. You tell yourself, this must be real because it feels so strong. But feelings in the beginning aren't always an indicator of long-term compatibility. It's like fireworks. They explode beautifully, but they don't last. A lot of people spend their dating lives chasing those fireworks over and over again, thinking the spark is the answer, when in reality it's the foundation that matters. So if you've ever found yourself caught in that cycle where relationships fizzle out around the same time, the first thing to understand is that it's not a curse. It's just the natural point when the honeymoon illusion starts wearing off. And if you can recognize it for what it is, you stop taking it personally. You stop asking, what's wrong with me? Why does no one stick around? And instead start asking, what's really being revealed here now that the glitter has settled? That question changes everything, because instead of clinging to an illusion, you're starting to deal with reality. And the truth is, reality isn't bad. In fact, reality is the place where genuine connection is built. Those 3 months aren't a curse, they're a test. They're showing you whether the connection you felt was based on surface level attraction or on something deeper that can last beyond the highlight reel. When you start seeing it that way, you stop being disappointed when the illusion fades and instead become curious. You start asking, know that I'm seeing the real them. Do I actually like this person? Do our values align? Do they make me feel safe, respected, and cared for? Even when the newness has worn off, that's the shift that begins to break the cycle. Because if you keep chasing the high of the honeymoon stage, you'll always feel like something is missing after 3 months. But if you learn to see those early fireworks as just the beginning, not the proof, you give yourself permission to slow down, to observe, and to let reality reveal itself before you decide how invested you want to be. And that mindset is what transforms the so-called curse into a powerful filter for the right relationship. Around that 3-month mark, something interesting starts to happen. The little mask we all wear in the beginning, that polished version of ourselves, begins to slip. Not because we're liars, but because no one can sustain perfection forever. At some point, real life kicks in. You see how someone handles stress, how they respond when plans change, how they act when they're tired or frustrated. Suddenly, the polished conversations give way to real ones, the ones where values and priorities begin to show through. And it's in this stage that so many relationships either deepen or dissolve. Think about it. At first, you may have loved how ambitious they seemed, but then you realize ambition to them means 80-hour work weeks and barely any time for you. Or maybe you admired their sense of humor, but 3 months in, that humor is often sarcastic and cutting in ways that don't sit right. These things aren't flaws. They're just the reality of who they are when they're not performing. And what's really happening is that the relationship is shifting from fantasy into truth. This is the stage where compatibility is tested. In the beginning, anyone can impress you for a date or two, but living in alignment with someone requires more than charm and chemistry. It requires shared direction, similar values, and respect in action, not just words. When those differences start to surface, many people panic. They assume something is wrong because it doesn't feel as effortless as it did in the beginning. They wonder if they've lost the spark. But in truth, nothing's gone wrong. It's just that reality has entered the room. This is also the moment when deal breakers often appear. Maybe you realize they're not as communicative as you need. Maybe they want very different things long term. Maybe their idea of commitment doesn't align with yours. These things are not negative discoveries. They are important truths that you need to see clearly now rather than 2 years down the line. The mistake is thinking that the surfacing of these differences means the relationship has failed. In reality, it means the relationship is being tested for its strength. Can it survive outside of the honeymoon glow? The reason this stage feels like a curse to some is because it forces us to confront our own expectations. Many people want the first version forever, the one where every date feels electric and every moment feels effortless. But real relationships aren't supposed to stay in that stage. They evolve. And when the curtain comes down, what you see behind it determines everything. Some people resist this transition. They cling to the early high, and the moment reality shows up, they pull away, telling themselves it must not be right. But what they're really doing is avoiding the deeper work of connection, the kind that requires patience and honesty. When you stop fearing this shift, you begin to embrace it as a gift. Because when reality shows up, you get a chance to answer the real questions. Do I feel respected here? Do I feel valued? Can I trust this person with my vulnerabilities? Do they show up consistently, not just when it's easy? Those answers matter more than any butterflies you've felt in month 1. The so-called 3-month curse isn't a curse at all. It's a reveal. It's the moment when you get to see whether this connection is built on something sustainable or just on chemistry and charm. And if you look at it that way, you realize how empowering it actually is. You're not losing something, you're gaining clarity. You're learning whether this is someone you can build with or whether it's time to move on before you invest too deeply. That clarity is what protects your heart in the long run. Because the goal isn't to keep the illusion alive forever. It's to discover whether the reality is someone you genuinely want to choose day after day when the sparkle has settled and the truth of who they are stands in front of you. That's not the end of romance. It's the beginning of something real. One of the biggest traps people fall into during those first few months is confusing chemistry with compatibility. That rush you feel when someone makes your heart race, when you can't stop thinking about them, when every touch feels magnetic, it's intoxicating. And it convinces you that this must be the real thing, because surely feelings this strong can't be wrong. But here's the hard truth. Intensity is not the same as alignment. You can have the most explosive spark with someone who is completely wrong for you long term. And if you mistake that intensity for proof of compatibility, you'll keep finding yourself heartbroken when the fire burns out. Think about how many times people say, but the connection was unreal. I've never felt that way before, as if that alone guarantees a future. It doesn't. What it guarantees is that your attraction system is firing. But attraction by itself doesn't tell you whether this person shares your values, your vision, or your way of moving through life. The chemistry is like the cover of the book. It grabs your attention, pulls you in, excites you, but you still have to read the story inside to know if it's one you actually want to be part of. This is why so many relationships collapse right around that 3-month mark. At first, the chemistry carries everything. You're riding the wave of lust, laughter, and constant novelty. But as the relationship settles, you start to realize that excitement doesn't solve the bigger questions. Do they want the same kind of life you do? Do they treat people with kindness? Do they respect your boundaries? Do they make you feel calm and safe, or do they keep you guessing and anxious? These are the markers of compatibility, and they can only be revealed over time. The problem is, many people are addicted to the high of intensity. They confuse butterflies with a green light and the absence of butterflies with a red one. So when the fireworks start to fade, instead of asking whether the connection is deepening into something more sustainable, they assume the relationship must not be right anymore. They go chasing the next spark, the next person who makes them feel that rush. And in doing so, they repeat the same cycle over and over, never realizing they're mistaking emotional intensity for emotional security. Breaking this pattern starts with reframing what you see as a sign of something real. That jittery, obsessive energy in the beginning might feel exciting, but it's not the same as peace. In fact, sometimes the person who feels calm, steady, and safe is overlooked because it doesn't feel dramatic enough. But if you want something lasting, you have to learn to value stability as much as excitement. The right relationship isn't one that keeps you on edge, it's one that grounds you. And here's the irony: when you stop chasing only intensity, you actually give yourself space to experience a deeper, more authentic kind of passion. Because real passion comes from trust, from knowing someone has your back, from being able to let your guard down and be fully yourself. That's the kind of connection that grows stronger over time instead of burning bright and then leaving ashes. So the next time you feel that rush and want to declare, "This must be love," pause. Ask yourself, does this person's life fit with mine? Do they bring out the best in me? Do I like who I am when I'm with them? If the answer is no, then the chemistry is just a fireworks show. Spectacular, but short-lived. And if the answer is yes, then you've got more than just chemistry. You've got the beginnings of compatibility, which is what sustains love beyond those first few months. When you start making that distinction, the so-called curse begins to lose its power. Because instead of being pulled blindly by the thrill of the spark, you're intentionally choosing the person who can stand with you when the spark settles into something far richer and more enduring. What often makes that 3-month mark feel like a curse is not just the fading of the honeymoon stage, but the quiet ways we sabotage ourselves when things begin to get real. In the early days, it's easy to enjoy the thrill because there's little at stake. You're not yet fully vulnerable. You're not yet invested enough to be truly hurt. And so you feel free to play, to flirt, to open up in light-hearted ways. But once the relationship reaches a point where the next step could mean deeper commitment, fears that were quietly sleeping in the background suddenly wake up. And those fears can cause people to pull away, sometimes without even realizing why they're doing it. It might be the fear of rejection. Because when someone starts to mean more to you, the thought of them walking away becomes terrifying. So, rather than risk being abandoned, you unconsciously distance yourself first. You stop calling as much, you pick fights over small things, or you convince yourself they're not right for you to justify leaving before they have the chance to hurt you. Or maybe it's the fear of commitment itself. For some people, the moment the relationship crosses into seriousness, panic sets in. Commitment feels like loss of freedom or like walking into a trap you can't get out of. So they sabotage by creating drama, pulling away, or suddenly deciding they're just not ready, even if things were going beautifully days before. And then there's another form of sabotage, the impossible standard. This shows up when the illusion wears off and instead of embracing the real person, you nitpick every flaw. They don't text back quickly enough. They have quirks that annoy you. They're not as endlessly exciting as they were in month one. But those aren't deal breakers. They're just signs of a normal human being. The problem is when you're secretly terrified of intimacy, even the tiniest imperfection becomes an excuse to run. You tell yourself, if it were really right, I wouldn't feel this doubt, when in fact that doubt is just the natural discomfort of moving closer to someone. This cycle of self-sabotage is powerful because it disguises itself as truth. You convince yourself you're making rational decisions, but really you're protecting yourself from vulnerability. And that's why the so-called 3-month curse feels like it has such a hold. The pattern repeats not because you're unlucky, but because you haven't recognized the fears running the show. The way to break it is to become aware of the stories you tell yourself when things get real. When you feel like pulling back, ask, is this because there's a genuine incompatibility? Or is this me trying to protect myself from the risk of being hurt? When you find yourself magnifying small flaws, ask, am I holding this person to a standard that no one could meet because I'm afraid of letting them in fully? When you're tempted to leave before they can, ask, am I choosing safety over the possibility of love? Real relationships require courage. They require sitting with discomfort, allowing yourself to be seen, and risking pain in exchange for connection. If you keep running from that discomfort, you'll always find yourself hitting the same wall around the same time. But if you choose to lean in instead of pull away, you'll discover that what feels terrifying at first eventually becomes freeing. Because once you stop sabotaging, you give yourself the chance to experience love that isn't just intense in the beginning, but steady and lasting when it matters most. One of the reasons the 3-month mark feels like such a breaking point is because, for so many of us, we spend those first weeks performing instead of being. We show up as the polished, curated version of ourselves, and we put a huge amount of energy into being liked. We avoid the conversations we're scared might turn someone off. We hold back our boundaries so we don't come across as too much, and we laugh at things we don't really find funny just to keep the peace. But eventually, that performance becomes exhausting. At some point, you can't keep pretending to be someone you're not. And when you finally let the real version of you slip out, the relationship either crumbles or begins to transform into something deeper. The truth is, no one can maintain a perfect mask forever. And yet so many people sabotage themselves in the early stages by trying to keep that mask firmly in place. They think, if I can just get them to fall for me, then I can relax. But here's the problem. If someone falls for the version of you that isn't fully authentic, what happens when the truth comes out? Either they feel deceived or you feel trapped in a role you don't want to play anymore. That's why breaking the cycle of the so-called curse means learning how to show up authentically earlier on. Authenticity doesn't mean oversharing everything on date one. It doesn't mean dumping your deepest insecurities on someone who hasn't earned your trust yet. What it does mean is being honest about who you are, what you value, and what you need, instead of trying to mold yourself into whatever you think the other person wants. It's the difference between saying, I'll just go along with this even though it makes me uncomfortable, and saying, actually, I'd prefer something else. That small act of honesty may feel risky, but it's also the filter that tells you whether this person is truly right for you. The irony is that showing up authentically is what creates real attraction. Think about it. Confidence is magnetic, and confidence comes from being unapologetically yourself. When you communicate your boundaries, when you express your needs without fear, when you allow your quirks to show, you're signaling that you know your worth. And someone who is right for you won't be turned off by that. They'll be drawn in by it. The wrong person might walk away, but that's not rejection, that's clarity. And clarity saves you months or years of wasted energy. So often, people cling to the performance because they're scared of scaring someone off. But the question to ask is, if the truth of who you are scares them away, is that really a relationship you want to fight for? Real love isn't about keeping someone interested through constant effort. It's about being able to relax into who you are and still feel accepted. If you can't be honest about what you want, if you can't speak up when something bothers you, then you're not in a relationship, you're in an audition. The 3-month mark often feels like the end because that's when the performance begins to crack. But instead of waiting for that moment to come, imagine what would happen if you dropped the act sooner. Imagine if you stopped trying to be impressive and started trying to be real. Some people would walk away faster, yes, but the ones who stayed would be the ones worth building with. That's the shift that breaks the pattern. Because when you show up authentically from the start, you stop fearing that moment when reality shows up. You're already living in reality. And that reality, as scary as it feels in the beginning, is the only place where true intimacy and lasting connection can exist. What makes relationships last beyond the 3-month mark isn't how exciting they feel in the beginning, but how strong the foundation becomes once the fireworks fade. The mistake so many people make is believing that the early rush of passion is supposed to carry them forever, when in truth, that stage is just the opening act. If you want a love that lasts, it can't be built on the thrill of novelty alone. It has to be built on consistency, on emotional safety, and on values that align in the everyday moments. Without those, no amount of chemistry will keep the relationship from crumbling once the glow wears off. Think about it like building a house. The first 3 months are the shiny paint, the new furniture, the beautiful decorations. It all looks amazing. But if the foundation underneath isn't solid, the entire structure is fragile. And when life brings stress, conflict, or change, that house won't stand. The same is true in love. You need more than attraction. You need respect, trust, and shared vision. Those things don't always sparkle like fireworks, but they're what keep a relationship standing when the spark alone isn't enough. One of the biggest signs of a strong foundation is consistency. Do they show up when they say they will? Do they follow through on promises? Not just in the big gestures, but in the small, everyday ways. Consistency creates safety, and safety is what allows love to grow. Because if you're always wondering where you stand, if you're left anxious and uncertain, it doesn't matter how much passion there was at the beginning. You won't feel secure enough to invest deeply. A real partner doesn't just give you butterflies, they give you peace. Another piece of the foundation is alignment in values. This doesn't mean you have to agree on everything, but your core vision for life needs to be compatible. Do you both want the same kind of commitment? Do you treat people in similar ways? Do your ideas about family, work, or lifestyle complement each other rather than constantly clash? Passion can make you overlook these questions in the beginning, but sooner or later, misaligned values create cracks that no chemistry can fill. Recognizing this early protects you from mistaking intensity for partnership. Emotional safety is the third part of that foundation, and it's something you only discover when the honeymoon stage passes. Can you share your feelings without being dismissed? Can you admit when you're upset without being punished for it? Do they make space for your vulnerability, or do they shut it down? Love can only deepen when both people feel safe to be real, flaws and all. And that safety doesn't come from fireworks. It comes from the daily actions of care, empathy, and patience. When you understand that building a foundation matters more than chasing a high, the so-called curse begins to lose its grip. Because you stop asking, how do I keep this exciting forever? And start asking, how do I create something strong enough to last? You stop chasing intensity and start investing in stability. And ironically, that's what allows passion to grow deeper. Because real intimacy, the kind that comes from trust and consistency, creates a fire that doesn't burn out after 3 months. It keeps glowing even in the ordinary moments. So if you've ever felt caught in the cycle of short-lived connections, the way to break it isn't to try harder to hold on to the honeymoon stage. It's to build something that doesn't rely on it. Ask yourself, is this person showing me consistency? Are they making me feel safe? Do our values align? If the answer is yes, then you're no longer building a fireworks show. You're building a fire that lasts through the seasons. That's how you turn the 3-month curse into the beginning of a love that doesn't just start strong, but stays strong.